Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching this video. I know that a lot of you have very, very strong viewpoints on this topic that we're going to talk about today. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a university professor. I have some expertise in manuscript criticism. I'm definitely not a theological scholar. I just talk about some things that are sort of theological on this channel because that's something that I sort of like, and I've really developed an academic curiosity for it. I may not be the right person to talk about this because I don't have a strongly entrenched viewpoint, but on the other hand, maybe my neutrality will be of help to some people who are on here. As I've gotten to know the people who watch this channel, some of you I know have had really difficult experiences around these issues. So I want to be really sensitive to some of your challenging experiences, some of your strong emotions, and some of your very entrenched viewpoints. I promise that I've really done a lot of research on this topic. I take it very seriously. I'll try to talk about these things with a mindset that's very somber and very academic at the same time. And I'm really grateful if you've even watched this far of this video, so I really appreciate the support. We're a new channel, so it really helps us out if you like our videos, if you like our content. If you are enjoying this video, please click the like button. If you subscribe to the channel, that's massively helpful for us. If you click the bell icon, that'll make sure that you get notifications about future videos. And please, the most important thing for me is weigh in the comment section. I would love to know what you all think. I'd love to know your opinions about some of the things that we're going to talk about. And if you have any topics that you'd like me to weigh in on in the future, I would also love to hear about that as well. All right. So with the mindset that I know that this topic has caused a lot of suffering, let's get started. So we're going to talk about 25 reasons why I think, after doing a lot of research on this from a very detached perspective, why I think it's okay to be gay and Christian at the same time. Some of these reasons are quite biblical. Some of them are very scientific, but I hope they're all appreciated as things that I've thoroughly researched. Some of these are very complicated topics that I'm just going to give a very terse distillation on, but I could do a deeper dive if you all want to see videos like this again in the future. Reason number 25. So first of all, no one has the right to obstruct the door to the Church of Jesus. Any true disciple of Jesus should know this. Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the light. Nobody gets to the Father except through me." I take that statement with a lot of gravity and with a lot of seriousness. To me, Jesus is saying that, there's no intermediary. So it's as though there's a door to God, and that door has been unlocked by Jesus, so any of us can walk through it. The church should ideally be the place where we get to refine and hone and further develop our relationships with Jesus. But we are not kings in the domain of the church. We should at best be stewards. We should never try to exalt ourselves to the level of kings in the Church of Jesus. And if I go to church tomorrow and I see Peter, Paul, Moses, Elijah, it doesn't matter who, they don't have the right to obstruct anyone from entering the church. And they don't have the right, in my mind, to say, here's an additional criteria for admission, here's who can come in, here's who can't. No one has that right. Jesus basically opened the doors for every person. And as church leaders, I hope people who are watching this video, who are church leaders, will take it to heart that it's their duty to be good stewards, to be very welcoming stewards, and to not keep people out of the house of Jesus. All right, so that's maybe the most important reason. No one has the right to obstruct the pathway to Jesus. All right, reason number 2. At worst, even if you believe all the most acerbic things that are said about the LGBTQ plus community, homosexuals are sinners who should be embraced by our community, just like we embrace other sinners. One of my viewers had a really great conversation with me on Reddit where they said, "I'm gay and I love Jesus. What can I do to make that relationship work and to make that relationship be okay and consistent?" And I said, well, here's what I recommend you do. I recommend that you go home every night, you pray, you acknowledge your sinful nature, and you embrace Jesus as much as you can by learning about the universe, by learning about Jesus, by learning about God, by learning about yourself. And I think those are all important things to do. And you know what? Those are also the things that I do myself every single night. Every night I acknowledge my sinful nature. Every night I ask Jesus for help so I can be a better and more righteous person. Now, I've been an atheist for almost my whole life. I'm only recently a reluctant believer. But I think these are important messages, and they apply to me just like they apply to anyone in the LGBTQ plus community. So at worst, homosexuals are sinners, but they still merit our help, and they should still be within our community. All right, reason number 3, any exclusion is hypocrisy. We all know that people in church communities are sinners to varying degrees. We all struggle with sins. No one is in a more privileged moral position than anyone else in any church community. I don't care what building it is that you walk into. There's no one who has the moral high ground in that building. We are all sinners, and that's one of the beautiful things about the messages of Jesus. They're powerfully, very powerfully egalitarian. So if we say, you can come in even though you're a drinker, you can come in even though you're adulterous, you can come in even though you're a liar, and we say people who are LGBTQ plus are not welcome in this community, well, then there's just no way to do that without being hypocritical. All right, reason number 4. We shouldn't judge others because judging others is inherently and fundamentally obstructionistic. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 18, verse 6, "Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea." Now, this is one of the most rhetorically impressive exhortations that Jesus gives in the New Testament. He's definitely saying we shouldn't obstruct each other and we shouldn't block anyone's path to moral achievement. If you think of the church as a resource to making yourself more righteous, more holy, and developing a closer relationship to Jesus, then we have to take very seriously that we shouldn't squander or limit that resource with our own judgment. When we obstruct people, according to Jesus, that's one of the worst things that we could do. One of my favorite books of the Old Testament is Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 2. "Be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven, and you are on earth. Therefore let your words be few." To me, this is a really beautiful encapsulation of the idea that, we're going to judge. We're just human beings, and we can't help but judge. But at the same time, we have to remember that God is the one who's in heaven. We don't have God's perspective. We just have a very human perspective, which is inherently narrow and fractionated. So this is another reason why we shouldn't judge others. It's just inherently obstructionistic, and it's something that we should avoid. All right, reason number 5. There are so many rules that Jesus gives us in the New Testament that are so much clearer that we can pursue with so much more vigor. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus gives us a very high watermark for what the apogee of human moral achievement could be and should be. And so there's so much more that we can shoot for. There are so many better places that we can put our energy, and there are so many rules that are much more clearly advocated. As we'll see in some of the subsequent reasons, the language around LGBTQ plus issues in the New Testament is very murky and very muddy, and there are just so many other rules that are spelled out so much more clearly where we could be placing our energy. All right, reason number 6. The core of Christianity is love and mercy and not legalism. One of my favorite phrases from Jesus, one of my favorite quotations is Matthew 23:24. Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, and he says, "You strain out a gnat, but you swallow a camel." Now, this has a bit of an esoteric meaning to people when they first hear about it, because you have to have sort of some background. So it took some research to figure out what Jesus was talking about here. But what he's saying is, the Jews, apparently the Pharisees, were straining their wine through a filter so that they wouldn't get any bugs. And the reason why they didn't want to consume any bugs is because those bugs aren't kosher animals. So the Jews didn't want to eat them. So Jesus is saying here, yeah, you're filtering out these tiny little insects, and you're going through so much effort, but at the same time, you're consuming a camel, which is also a non-kosher animal. So Jesus' point here is very clearly, don't focus on the minutia. Focus on the bigger lessons that I'm giving you. You have to remember love. You have to remember mercy. You have to remember forgiveness. And you have to focus on the commandments themselves, rather than focusing on a lot of minutia, so much so that you're losing the plot on the bigger things. So again, the core of Christianity has always been about love and being merciful. It's not about judging. It's not about legalism. It's not about minutia. And Jesus is telling us this in this quotation. And I think this has great applicability on how we should live our lives and how we should judge others morally, or at least refrain from judging others morally. All right, reason number 7. Jesus actually never directly condemns homosexuality. Jesus gives us a lot of quotes in the New Testament. None of them are directly about homosexuality. Jesus never mentions same-sex relationships anywhere in the Gospels. He never teaches on this. And much in a different direction, Jesus consistently teaches on inclusion, on challenging religious hypocrisy, and also defending the marginalized. So to me, that's very clear evidence that Jesus doesn't want us to prioritize working against the LGBTQ plus population, and instead says, focus on inclusivity, focus on defending the marginalized, rather than focusing on, punishing a population or doing something to somehow restrict their access. So Jesus at least never verbally mentions homosexuality at all. I think that's an important point. Reason number 8. The Old Testament laws we know are not binding on Christians. Now, we know this from reading Hebrews 8:13 and Galatians chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. There are things in the Old Testament that nobody really follows other than the most orthodox of Jews, and those things are sort of referred to as a purity code or holiness code. These are things like don't eat shellfish, or don't wear any mixed fabrics, so you can't mix two fabrics together. Now, Paul, I think in Galatians chapter 5, really delineates that Jesus lived a sinless life, and we needed Jesus to do that because the Old Testament is all about iterative failures of the Jews. The Israelites failed so many times to uphold the covenant of God that we needed Jesus to come in to live a sinless life, and Jesus doing so really created a new covenant in which we can have a direct relationship with God. And so that's very important. And so we don't need to take the Old Testament rules about homosexuality and apply them to anyone because, again, we're in an era of a new covenant because Jesus fulfilled the old covenant by himself leading a sinless life, and also by being the only person who could do that. All right, reason number 9. Paul's condemnation about homosexuality is interesting. It probably targeted more exploitation and promiscuity and not necessarily sexual orientation itself. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into this, but there is a lot of very deep literature. Paul uses a neologism, which is kind of a word that we don't find elsewhere in the literature, which is arsenokotai. Now, this is the word that Paul uses to refer to homosexual relationships. There's a lot of debate on what the meaning of this word actually is. There are some people who think that this is referencing only exploitative homosexual relationships. A lot of people think that Paul is specifically referring to pederasty. Now, pederasty is a very abhorrent moral practice of sexual relations between an older man and a younger boy. So it's very bad. But I think Paul's point here is that it's not that all homosexuality is necessarily wrong. It's the excessive idolatrous and exploitative sexuality that he's speaking against. We'll see some other supportive evidence for that in later reasons, but I think the point here is that Paul may be condemning, especially if you do a very deep dive into the language, which I don't have time to do in this video, but if you do a very deep dive, it does seem like the language that Paul is using is meant to target exploitative relationships and a lot of promiscuity rather than sexual orientation in isolation. All right, reason number 10. Similarly, Paul was meaning to condemn broad moral decay and not isolated individual traits. So what Paul uses is a rhetorical device called a vice list, where he talks about all these behaviors and kind of lumps them together and says these are all very bad behaviors to engage in. But what Paul uses here is he's grouping a lot of different behaviors. So he's grouping homosexuals with fornicators and with other very bad behaviors in his mind. The problem is this is a group that he's putting together as a vice list to refer to people who have given themselves over to lustfulness. That doesn't mean that any of those behaviors in isolation and in moderation is bad. Let me give you two analogies that kind of clarify that a little bit more. Let's say I'm talking about the alt-right, right? So I could talk about the alt-right and say they're ultra-patriotic, authoritarian, and very bigoted, right? Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be patriotic. So if you're patriotic in moderation, I think that's a very reasonable thing to do. And that doesn't mean that I'm speaking against patriotism in general. I'm just describing this one group with bad traits, and I'm telling you a little bit more about this group. Here's another reason why we can think about Paul's statements in a bit of a nuanced light. And that is that one of the other behaviors that Paul vilifies is fornication. Now, Paul is obviously not saying you can't have sex with anyone, you can't fornicate at all. Obviously, like a loving relationship, that would be okay with most of the other ethics that Paul lays out. So when he says fornicators, he's not saying you can't have sex at all. He's just saying these people gave themselves over to lustfulness and they became excessively fornicators, and that was a bad thing. So again, Paul is talking about a broad moral decay. He's not talking about each of these traits in isolation as independently being a bad trait. All right, reason number 11. Celibacy, according to Paul, is a gift. It's not a commandment. So Paul recommends celibacy for those who are called to it in 1 Corinthians 7, but he doesn't require celibacy. Now, this sets up a problem because if you say that people who are LGBTQT plus have to be celibate, then you're changing it from a gift to a commandment. This is a very profound shift, right? And so the only way that you can sort of do that and keep celibacy as a gift is to apply it the same way, sort of more even-handedly, to the LGBTQT plus community and to the straight community. So in other words, in order to treat celibacy as a gift and not a commandment, you have to essentially not command LGBTQT plus populations to stay celibate. I hope that makes sense. Celibacy is a gift, not a commandment, and therefore to apply it evenly to straight and LGBTQ plus communities, you have to treat it as such. All right, reason number 12. Promiscuity was a very different set of behaviors in the era of Paul. Now, we lose sight of this, but and I'll have to give you a little bit of background, but one of the things that we have to remember is that if you wanted to be promiscuous in the era of Paul, there were no contraceptive devices. So if you said, I want to go out and have sex with a lot of people, the only way to do that essentially was to have sex with people of the same gender. And that way you could avoid any procreative sex. I hope that makes sense. What I'm saying here is promiscuity had a different complexion during the era before contraceptive devices. So if you said, I just want to have unbridled, lustful sex with a lot of people, you essentially had to do that with people of the same gender. So I think that's what happened when some of those people gave themselves over to lust in a way that was really indiscriminate. So promiscuity just had a very different complexion in the era before contraceptive devices, and I think we lose sight of that. And I think that makes some of these issues less applicable to modern times. All right, reason number 13. Based on cross-population studies of other species, we have seemed to observe homosexual behavior in a lot of different scientific settings. There have been about a few hundred species where we have observed homosexuality. It's mostly documented in bonobos and dolphins. But this suggests that homosexuality may not necessarily be an unnatural behavior. So some of our revelations from the sciences do seem to indicate that homosexuality is something that we find in nature. We shouldn't necessarily expect humans to be that fundamentally different from other mammals. So I think same-sex behavior is something that we shouldn't be too surprised with in humans. Reason number 14. Scientific studies do support that sexual orientation is not necessarily something that you do volitionally. In other words, it's not a choice. And we know this from looking at birth order studies. This seems to work very well in humans. We don't have as much documentation in other mammals, but in humans, we found a correlation between birth order and homosexuality. I think this is important because my field is in the sciences, so I think this is something that a lot of people aren't aware of. But if you have increased birth order numerically as a male, then you have a marginally, incrementally higher risk of being homosexual the later your birth order number is. Now, I know that's probably a little bit complicated, so I'll explain it in a different way. Let's say you're a husband and wife, and you have 6 children, and they're all males. So with each subsequent male, there is a higher risk of homosexuality. And I don't mean to treat it as like a risk or stigmatize it necessarily. I'm just saying there's an increased risk and increased prevalence of homosexual behavior. So that means that the 6th son will have a higher risk than the 5th son. The 5th son will have a higher risk than the 4th son, and so on and so forth. So this does suggest that there's a biological basis of homosexuality, and this also suggests that it's not really something that we can choose. It's not something that we can engage in a way that's volitional. Very fascinatingly, people have written about maybe this comes into play in mammals because of population control issues. So in other words, let's say you're a husband and wife in the state of nature and you have 6 children. Well, if those 6 children all want to procreate, then very quickly you have an issue with exponential population growth. So some people have written that maybe this is a way that mammals keep their populations in check, that if there are other, sons born, that they will not be as likely to procreate and they'll be more likely to be homosexual. Homosexuals in nature often are part of the child rearing experience. They're part of families and they help the species in general. So it may be that homosexuality is a way of sort of controlling the population based on the insights of people who are writing about this in the biological literature. I think that's really fascinating stuff. But the fact that there is a birth order predisposition to homosexuality to me means at least there's some component of homosexuality that we can look at and say this is actually biological. It's not purely just a matter of choice. All right, reason number 15. Christians shouldn't be called to repress their nature, but should instead live authentically. Psalms 139:14 says, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. So this to me means that we should look at God and say, God, thank you for making us in such a wonderful way. I often, when I pray, again, I'm kind of a reluctant believer, so I don't often get super theological on this channel. But when I pray, I'll often say, God, thank you for making me the way that I am. And I'm really grateful for that. And to tell LGBT plus people or gay people that they can't do that is to deny the goodness of God's creation. All right, reason number 16. The early church was based on embracing outsiders and changing the course of early Christianity. So there is a trajectory of increased inclusivity even in the early church, even from the very first roots of the church, even in the book of Acts. So that trajectory can be upheld by supporting LGBT plus populations. All right, reason number 17. The gospel is and should be for everyone. Listen to some of this language that gets used in the New Testament. Romans 10:13. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Galatians 3:28. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. This is an ethos of radical inclusivity. And this comes out of the words of Jesus, and it grows out in the later philosophy that the early Christian church embraced. The gospel is for everyone. It should be for everyone. And excluding any population based on factors that they can't control is inherently wrong. All right, reason number 18. There is mention of the Unix in the Bible, which does seem to foreshadow LGBTQ plus inclusion. I'll put some quotes on the screen, but Jesus in Matthew 19:12 talks about eunuchs, including eunuchs who are quote-unquote born that way. Now, some scholars do see this as a recognition of sexual and gender variance, and so this suggests that there may be a foreshadowing in the New Testament of later LGBTQ plus inclusion. I'll also put a quote from the Old Testament, Isaiah 56:3-5, where God promises eunuchs, which is a marginalized group, a place within my walls, a memorial, and a name better than sons and daughters. So, in other words, there is this sort of ethos that eunuchs, including those who are born that way, according to the words of the New Testament, should be included, and that maybe is a harbinger for later inclusion of the LGBTQ plus population. All right, reason number 19. Jesus says that we should recognize other people who have the fruits of the Holy Spirit. And it does seem like many in the LGBTQ plus population, many queer Christians, really mirror the church's ethos of how we should respond to others. For instance, there are a lot of really very inspiring examples of forgiveness and embracing very Christian values towards other people that are exemplified by members of the LGBTQ plus population. So if we really do know other witnesses of Jesus by their spiritual fruits, then this does seem like something that we should be able to tap into as we recognize brothers and sisters in the LGBTQ plus community. Reason number 20, there is a lot of diversity in the voice of the church on how to deal with LGBTQ plus populations. Now, this to me suggests that at the very least, this issue is indeed very murky. So there's not a unified voice of Christianity. So I really think, to me, as just an individual navigating a lot of different subsects, a lot of different facets of Christianity, I'll put a list on the screen of sects that are welcoming of LGBTQ plus population members. And to me, this whole ethos means that you can't take as a unified Christian message that clearly we need to exclude people who are LGBTQ+. There's just too much diversity in the voice of different churches and different sub-churches and different church sects that it's hard to look at that whole body of church behavior and say, yeah, this is definitely something that is endorsed by as an important moral priority for us. Reason number 21. There is historical evidence suggesting that there were same-sex love relationships in some of the early Christian saints. I'm speaking specifically of Serge and Bacchus. I'll put some quotes on the screen because I don't want to make this video too much longer, but there is evidence that Serge and Bacchus, who were early Christian martyrs and saints, that they had a very special relationship that may have had a romantic component to it. Reason 22. There is a doctrine of progressive revelation, and this supports inclusion and changing our behavior to more closely reflect the values of Jesus and the values of the New Testament. So the church eventually did move to abolish slavery. It affirmed women in leadership roles. So there are things that have been done within the realm of progressive revelation where the church has changed its behaviors to be more inclusive. And so there is a basis for extending that umbrella to include our treatment of LGBTQ plus populations. All right, reason number 23. Jesus' resurrection was meant to undo systems of exclusion. Again, I'll put some quotes on the screen because other people have written more extensively about this, but the resurrection of Jesus wasn't just about individual salvation. It was about overturning systems of death, exclusion, and shame. So inclusion of the LGBTQ plus population exemplifies the lessons that are meant to be learned from Jesus' resurrection itself. All right, reason number 24. There have been episodes of history where the church has misread scriptures in the past. So we have made errors in the church community of the way we read scriptures, and it's not always true that the way we read scriptures is the way that scriptures should be read. So we shouldn't think that just because many church leaders say now that scripture should be read to the exclusion of LGBTQ plus populations, that is necessarily a fact. In other words, church attitudes around this issue do seem to be changing. And so it's possible that some church leaders, some church groups have made an error in the way they've interpreted the scriptures in this case. And I think that's just something important to keep in mind, that there have been errors in the past. There have been things that we have walked back in the past. And I think this is important. All right, and finally, reason number 25. I think this whole debate does misprioritize our spiritual growth. When I look at the lessons of Jesus, I see a wonderful set of values that we should live by. It is not my right to go and start judging other people because I feel like until I really feel like I have fully embodied those lessons of Jesus. So to me, if I'm sitting next to somebody at church and I know that they're sinful, that doesn't really become my business until they make it my business. My business as I'm sitting in church is to try to be a better person. And let me tell you, when I have that task in front of me, I have my hands full. Like that is the one thing, like I do not need to take on more tasks. I just need to worry about being a better person and be more righteous. So engaging in this whole debate, it does sort of misprioritize our spiritual where our spiritual priorities should lie and what our spiritual goals should be. If I someday wake up in the morning and I say, you know what, I'm the perfect Christian, I now live a sinless life, then maybe I'll start taking on the behavior of others. But until that day comes, I'm way off from that right now. All right. I do want to give you a little bit more about my opinion, okay, and then I'll close the video after that. And I have three things that I want to say just briefly. The first thing is, I don't have a super strong vested interest in this topic. I just know that a lot of people are suffering, and people have communicated that to me in various different platforms and on various different social media. So I at least respect their suffering enough that I wanted to weigh in on this because I think my perspective is hopefully valid, and hopefully after hearing my reasons, you think so too. And the second thing that I want to say is, this is not a whole feel-good video. This is not meant to be super sexually empowering. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of what we tend to do in our culture is we say, yeah, you're okay the way you are. Now go and be sexually liberated. So being LGBTQT plus positive or affirming can very quickly translate and escalate into saying, yeah, you should be sex positive. You should go out there and be promiscuous and do whatever you want. And that is definitely 100% not the message that I want to convey. The message of this video is not that you should be promiscuous. It's that you should treat intimacy as a special gift. You should respect yourself. You should definitely respect the person that you're engaging in intimacy with. And I think that's the most important thing that I could say in this video. So don't take LGBTQT positive, LGBTQT plus permissiveness to the extent of sex positivity. We tend to do that a lot in our culture, and I think that is bad. And I'm not saying that you're any worse off than me if you engage in sinful behavior, but I'm saying don't give yourself over to lust. Try not to be sinful. I try not to be sinful as well. I'm not saying that I don't have my vices or I don't have my sins, but my point is that being permissive about your sexual orientation should not extend to being super sex positive to the point that you're promiscuous. And often in our society today, it really does. And that's really unfortunate. All right, the very last thing that I want to say is what I have observed in my life more than almost anything else is that people who love each other are really hurtful to each other. Okay? I don't know why that is, but we tend to really hurt the people that we love the most. So the most important thing that I can say is it's hard to find love, and it's hard to navigate those wounds and those hurts that we inflict on each other. So if your orientation is gay, or if it's queer, or whatever your orientation is, finding love is difficult. It's challenging. And if you're out there trying to find love, then we need all the support that we can get, and we should support other people as much as we can. And that applies not just to people who are gay or bisexual, but it applies also just as equally and just as strongly to people who are straight. It's just hard to find love. It's hard to navigate all the harm that we do to each other. And so I think we need support. We need a good church community to fall back on when our relationships go awry, or we need a good church community to fall back on when we don't have relationships and when we're suffering because of that. So I hope the lesson of this video is, at least in part, that we do need love, but we also need connection and we need community. And church communities are a resource that should not be deprived from any community. And the reason is because love is really hard to navigate in this world. It's hard for any of us, no matter what your sexual orientation is. And I think that's just a lesson that we can't take seriously enough. All right, well, if you've made it to this point in the video, then I'm super, super grateful. Don't forget, please like the video if you've heard something that you like. Please subscribe to the channel. Please click the bell icon for notifications. And I have a feeling that the comment section for this video is going to be pretty active, but I would love to know your comments. In the past, some of you commented on things that I totally disagree with, and then I do some research and you turn out to be right. So please weigh in with your comments so I can learn more from all of you. I'm really grateful that you've supported this channel. We're still a very new channel, so thank you so much for the support. And as always, have a really wonderful day.